Vivek Ramaswamy is an American entrepreneur, author, and political figure. He gained prominence as a biotech investor and founder of Roivant Sciences, a company focused on developing innovative therapies. Ramaswamy is also known for his book, Woke Inc., Inside Corporate America's Social Justice Scam. In 2023, he announced his candidacy for the Republican nomination for president and ultimately lost to Donald Trump, who he endorsed. Many media outlets speculated Trump would consider Vivek for vice president. Vivek is widely considered to be a strong contender to eventually replace Trump as the figurehead of the MAGA movement. So this is a guy who came from nowhere and immediately skyrocketed to success in American politics. It's surprising for someone in their first year in politics to finish fourth in the primary for a major political party, beating out former Vice President Mike Pence, former Governor Chris Christie, and Senator Tim Scott. The reason why Vivek had so much immediate success and media attention is because of his uniquely powerful rhetorical gifts. In our Obama analysis, we focused largely on Obama's use of framing. Vivek uses framing quite effectively as well, but he takes it to a whole other level. Vivek is so effective at branding himself as a centrist, as someone who can understand and even agree with progressive ideas, that he is able to sit in some of the most liberal spaces in media and sell a conservative message without the audience ever realizing it. To take a look at how this works, we're going to go over Vivek's interview with Charlamagne Tha God on The Breakfast Club and examine the different framing strategies Vivek uses to market his ideology. For those who don't know, The Breakfast Club is a morning radio show hosted by Charlamagne Tha God that features discussions on social issues and current events. Although Charlamagne openly holds liberal viewpoints, The Breakfast Club often involves discussion with prominent conservative guests like Candace Owens, Larry Elder, and Ben Carson. The Breakfast Club is a progressive, activist space that is proudly progressive and proudly activist, but Charlamagne's open-mindedness creates an opening for popular figures who are loudly conservative and reactionary. The viewership is largely liberal and incredibly racially diverse, but is largely marketed toward minority communities. Because of this, it's the ideal sandbox to see how Vivek does his work. Vivek is a young Indian guy who is friendly and engaging, but has also spent the last year touting his MAGA loyalties. This creates a contradiction that Vivek has 40 minutes to make sense of and then sell. And right off the bat, we can see how Vivek is going to approach this interview. Charlamagne tees him up with this comment about his RNC speech.
Great speech at the RNC.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I tried to talk through the speech, through the camera, to people at home who traditionally aren't viewed as part of the Republican base. And I think that that's something that we should all probably do a better job of, especially as a young person. Right? So part of my speech was talking to millennials, talking to Gen Z. I actually think a lot of millennials, so I'm 38, I'm a millennial, are pretty jaded and disaffected with policies that Republicans enacted, right? The Iraq War. Well, you know what? It was a failure. We got to admit that. Brought to you by the Republican Party of 2004.
Look carefully at the wording that Vivek is using here. Vivek identifies openly the group he is talking to, millennials and Gen Z. Then he connects himself to this group.
So I'm 38, I'm a millennial.
Instead of lambasting this group for not supporting his candidate, he reaches out to them, actually agrees with them. This is a Republican politician openly condemning his own party and joining hands with young liberal voters to do it. But he's not really criticizing his party. He's criticizing a past Republican Party that most people don't like now. Vivek is able to condemn Republicans because the voters the Trump campaign have already locked up have no loyalty to the GOP establishment. It's just to Trump. So Vivek can use the liberal animus against Republicans as an olive branch to say, I'm just like you. I also think they're bad. I also hate the Iraq War. This is the first instance of something Vivek will come back to a lot. He is ostensibly ceding ground to the left by saying Republicans and Republican policies of the past suck, but this is only done because it's safe to do so. And he never gets specific or current enough to actually stand against the current Republican Party. So he's not really ceding anything, even if it may look that way. Let's continue.
We got to remind people to say, you know what? Both parties, including the Republican Party, have been responsible for some of those policy failures. But you still can't be jaded about your country. And to Gen Z, my message is, you'll be the generation that actually saves the country. You don't have to bend the knee to anybody's orthodoxy. Not a Republican orthodoxy, not a Democratic orthodoxy. Think independently for yourself. And so anyway, I think that was hopefully a productive message and a starting point to say we don't have to shackle ourselves through these partisan lenses.
Here, Vivek says that young people have a right to be mad at the two-party system and their faults, but they must think independently. They must not be jaded. These sound like broad platitudes, positive statements that anyone can agree with. But as we get deeper into the interview and into how Vivek operates, we can see that he is actually trying to communicate two specific things. First, when he says think independently, what does he actually mean? When he says not to bend the knee to anyone's orthodoxy, what orthodoxy is he talking about? It's unclear what he means, and that's not by accident. A Trump supporter hearing these statements will immediately be visualizing the orthodoxy and the establishment as liberal media, university departments trying to trans kids, politicians raising taxes and letting illegals into the country. But a progressive anti-establishment young person, the people Vivek is here to market to, may visualize banks or capitalists or corrupt politicians. So by being this vague, Vivek can get everyone's attention and they can fill the gaps themselves. And the fact that he is here, as a Republican, saying this, tacitly confirms that at least the new Republican Party stands behind this messaging. Secondly, Vivek is neutralizing voters from going to the polls, and he's pretty subtle about it. To be clear, Vivek's first objective is to get these young listeners to vote for Trump. But if he fails, he's setting up a contingency plan. By using both sides are bad rhetoric, he knows he's not really going to get any Trump voters to stay home. That's not who he's talking to. But if he can nudge even a small amount of liberal voters to say, fuck it, both parties are bad, and not get out for Harris, his job has been completed. So Vivek is just going to keep riding this line and sneakily selling his message, right? Actually, Charlamagne busts it up right away and asks a clarifying question that forces Vivek to take an actual position.
But why do y'all continue to bend the knee to MAGA then?
Well, what is MAGA, right? We could talk about that. I think that there are many flavors of MAGA, and the idea of making here's my flavor of it. Okay, I'm not somebody who tries to hearken back to a past and say, "Oh, I want to go back to the America that I grew up in, or the America that I know."
You represent the future.
I want to make America
what
great.
America should be and could be.
I want to make America greater than it has ever been before.
Yes.
So I don't just want to make America great again. I want to make America greater than ever.
So what we just saw was Vivek being asked a difficult question, and within 30 seconds, being able to not only divert away from the difficulty of the question, but to present an optimistic view of the future that everyone wants to hear. He's able to hit the both sides are bad platitude once again, completely divert from having to defend MAGA, and then wrap it up in a bow with his vague version of fixing an imperfect country and aspiring towards greatness. The genius here is not just how he diverted, but how quickly and concisely this process takes place. Charlamagne asks, why bend the knee to MAGA? And here's Vivek's timeline in bullets. What is MAGA? There are many different MAGAs. I'm not bad MAGA. I want a good future. So Vivek can clearly not only survive, but thrive when tough questions are thrown at him, as long as they don't force him to take a stance on an actual policy issue. Something he can't just throw out platitudes to and avoid answering yes or no to, whether or not he supports it. But what happens when he is in this uncomfortable situation? We don't have to search much for this. This happens only a few minutes later, when Charlamagne brings up the topic of abortion.
Yeah, I don't think...
and we're not doing it yet.
The reason I don't like I'm not going to say I dislike the term weird. I just think it undersells a lot of the damage that Republicans are doing to this country, just labeling it weird. Well, I think abolishing women's reproductive rights, is a little bit more than weird.
But I think
it's not useful.
Whoa, that was kind of weird there, right? Charlamagne makes a pretty unambiguous statement about how he feels about abortion, that it's not merely weird that Republicans want to restrict abortion rights, but it's worse, more tyrannical. It requires a word that is more damning and more serious. Vivek seems to agree, but he replaced weird with not useful. This is a trend I've seen popping up over the last several years in political discourse. Someone will get hit with a question and they will evade it in a way that usually looks like this. Person A will ask, do you think X thing is bad? Person B will support X thing, but it's so controversial that they don't want to come out and say that. So instead of saying, yeah, I do support X, and owning the blowback, or lying and saying, no, I oppose X, they will come up with these words that criticize X without ever actually saying they disagree. You can say X is unproductive, or X is unstrategic, or as Vivek does here, X is not useful. It sounds like he's agreeing with Charlamagne, but is giving himself a significant amount of space. Let's see what he fills it with.
Donald Trump, to the ire of a lot of Republicans, is opposed to a national ban on abortion. So am I, by the way, and I said so in the Republican debate stage. I was in the minority last year when I say that I am opposed to a federal ban on abortion, just on constitutional principle. Should at least leave it to the states. That made a lot of conservatives and a lot of Republicans upset. I tend to come from a pretty libertarian leaning school of thought. I want the federal government to be doing basically as little as is required to make sure the country is secure and people are allowed to live their own lives.
Vivek makes it very clear here that he opposes a national abortion ban. It doesn't matter that most people oppose this, or even that most Republicans do. All that matters is that he's able to paint a picture that he's against something Republicans are for. Essentially, Vivek is trying to say that he, and by extension Trump, are against an aspect of republicanism, therefore being able to distinguish himself as a new Republican movement, which throughout this whole interview he tries to do. Libertarianism is a great mechanism for accomplishing this, because it's not tarnished with the level of ideological baggage that conservatism is. So Vivek is in two steps separating himself from the far right. He's opposing a federal abortion ban and marrying his rationale to a more moderate brand of right-wing politics. And he's bringing Trump along with him, vouching for him as a member of this new moderate brand of Republicans that are willing to stand up to far-right policies. What's interesting strategically is not that he's trying to appear moderate. It's that his main way of doing that is not hammering home his policy positions, it's his framing, and how his ability to oppose elements of his party is a stronger message than merely saying his policy.
So my challenge actually to a lot of the Kamala Harris supporters is most of the case that I hear involve invoking Donald Trump. What is the case for Kamala Harris that does not involve referencing Donald Trump at all? I think that's missing right now.
Oh, I got that.
And for Republicans, I'd give you similar advice, too. What do we stand for? Not just what are we against. What do we actually stand for? Offer that vision. And I think the country will be better off.
Vivek keeps bringing up the point of focus on policy throughout the interview. And to his credit, Vivek throws off a few vague, I don't know if I would call them policy suggestions, but certainly goals of his. He even says Republicans should focus more on policy than on the Biden-Kamala coup, but immediately gets sucked back into focusing on the issue he just said we should divert from. In this way, when Vivek talks about policy, he's not actually trying to talk about policy. He's using policy as a platitude. This is the kaleidoscope of Vivek Ramaswamy. Terms like policy can appear. He can make concessions to the other side. He can talk to voter groups that conservatives don't typically appeal to and try to frame himself as a new kind of Republican. All things that seem concrete, that seem different and edgy and meaningful. But all these moving parts only exist in their labels. When Vivek says he wants to focus on policy, it's not because he wants to talk about policy in this format. And I know that because he doesn't really go on to do that. He does it because he thinks Republicans are better on policy and that most people have a slight positive association with the economy or policy and Republicans. When he tries to build bridges, it's not to work together. It's to appear as if he's building bridges. He is able to convey great meaning without ever risking anything.